Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Neville Crabbe. I'm Vice President of Communications with Atlantic Salmon Federation. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Tom Cheney, our Director of Marketing, and Charles Coussin, our Regional Program Director for Quebec. If there are any requests for French language interviews or answers, Charles will be able to help us out. The reason that we're here today is to announce the results of an 18-month investigation into plastic dumping by salmon farming companies in Newfoundland and Labrador. And as a result of that investigation, to call on Prime Minister Mark Carney and the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, Joanne Thompson, to impose a moratorium on salmon farm expansion in Newfoundland and Labrador until the mess can be cleaned up and other issues with the industry addressed. We have some slides here to help illustrate what we're talking about. This is a map of the south coast of Newfoundland. That's the area where all salmon farms in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador are located. The little black dots with yellow outlines are existing leases, and the arrow going west is where companies are actively looking to expand. Flip it. So just a bit of a timeline of how we've got here today. It really started in the spring of 2024. We were contacted by an individual from Harbour Breton named Mel Jackman. He's been raising concerns about plastic pollution in Hermitage Bay for years and years, with both levels of government, with various agencies, with company representatives, and he wasn't getting any traction or response. Perhaps he reached a point of desperation and contacted us, sent us a few pictures, and we figured, well, we should go have a look. So in April of 2024, two of my colleagues went to a site near the community of Galtus called The Locker. It's a small cove tucked away out of sight from the direction and path of most boat traffic. And what we saw there was frankly astonishing. There were more than 20 very large, obviously degraded and obsolete sea cages, many with broken components, big pieces of styrofoam leaking out. There were industry feed barges, there were plastic feed bags everywhere. It was a total mess. And at that time, we thought, well, we need to understand a little bit more about this. Where did the garbage come from? How long has it been here? And we did our first satellite analysis at that time. It was concentrated just on that one cove near Galtus. We found that as far back as we could access satellite imagery to 2011, the garbage was present. It was there in varying quantities over time. There was a peak of 25 sea cages visible in 2018, a few less when we were there in 2024. We reported what we found to the Newfoundland Minister of Fisheries, Forestry, and Agriculture at the time. There was no action taken that we're aware of. We made a second site visit in the summer of 2024, documented the site in more detail, and made formal complaints to Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and the province of Newfoundland and Labrador's Environmental Enforcement Division. Nothing came of those complaints that we were aware of. So in the winter of 2024, we completed that satellite survey of the locker. We released the satellite images, the ground images, and a few weeks after that, there was a cleanup order issued by the province of Newfoundland and Labrador for that one site, the locker, and any other sites that existed. Around that time, we also engaged the image analysis firm that we were working with to do a broader survey of the entire South Coast, eventually looking at 106 sites, every single licensed fish farming site in the province. We ultimately identified 6 locations like the locker, some with significantly more garbage, obsolete, and broken equipment. And you'll see what I mean when we get to the images. The cleanup order was in place from January 2025, and as far as we know, is still in place today. We completed that expansive survey. The satellite images we were able to access went up to May 2025. They did indicate some evidence of cleanup, but it wasn't definitive. On June 23rd, we went by boat. I was there personally. We were able to visit 2 of the 6 identified dump sites, and we found significant quantities of material still in the water. And for the first time, using a remote operated vehicle, we were able to get pictures of equipment that appeared to have been deliberately sunk and was on the bottom. So just to give you a sense of what those satellite images look like and how we were able to conduct the analysis, you can see that, even to the untrained eye, that's not an operating salmon farm. An operating facility will have cages in orderly rows, anywhere from 8 to 12. You can see how some of that equipment is misshapen. These are 3 of the 6 dump sites that we identified. A bit on the methodology. So the analysis ultimately took in over 60,000 images. An AI model was trained by our partner Planetix to recognize that shape, the very distinctive shape of the salmon farm ring. From that, we were able to determine how these sites were being used, where the garbage was located, and then when we did find these anomalous areas like you see on the screen, we purchased commercially available Maxar Worldview images, which are what you see, and they're spatially fine enough to enable us to actually count the individual rings. So that's what it looks like from space. Now, here's what it looks like from the ground, and this is June 23rd, 2025, months after the provincial cleanup order was issued. Rhodey Bay in the middle, near the community of St. Albans, that's the most polluted site that we discovered. There were over 130 cages dumped in there at one point. You can see that equipment is obviously not being stored, ready to be pressed back into service. A lot of the components are broken. Once those PVC pipes are compromised, they can't be used again for active fish farming. They're permanently degraded and weakened. A bit of a closer shot there on the left, that's the locker. That's the first site that we went to in the spring of 2024. We were also there at the end of January 2025, and it had been cleaned up. We did a flyover by helicopter, and then we were told, you guys got to go back to the locker. They're putting more garbage in there. My reaction was, well, I mean, that can't be true. Who would be so callous? But certainly on June 23rd, we were there. The image on screen left is the locker from that day. There's more garbage moved in there, broken pipes, that styrofoam falling out of the components, being picked at by seabirds. So this plastic pollution is widespread, it's persistent, it's big and small. I mentioned we were able to take a look underwater. We received information that there's potentially a significant amount of equipment that's been sunk. In other places, like Rhodey Bay, where we have imagery going back to 2011, a lot of the equipment that's been there for 14 years or so remains buoyant. It might be partially submerged, but it's not sunk. This is PVC filled with styrofoam. It's very, very buoyant. You can see that image of the cage. It appears to be trying to float up, but there's something holding that down on the bottom. There's an entire net there. We didn't have a ton of time on that day, so we were able to just find one of these cages, but we believe there may be more out there, and we believe it's incumbent upon regulators, including Fisheries and Oceans Canada and the Canadian Coast Guard, to deploy some resources and get a true sense of the scale of this sunken garbage problem. Not only does it represent a potential hazard to navigation, but it's a big hindrance to other fisheries in the area. Go ahead, Tom. Now, I mentioned that there has been some cleanup since that provincial order went into effect. There was a plastic recycling facility opened in 2024 in Harbour Breton. This picture is from February. You can see a fairly significant unknown quantity of plastic has been hauled in there. To give you a sense of the scale of the problem, one of the companies that's operating in the area, Moe, they announced in June that they had completed the cleanup of all of their equipment that was in the water, and it was 260 tons. So that's one of 3 companies that we know which have garbage in the water. Go ahead, Tom. So why a moratorium on expansion? We believe that expansion of the industry right now is unnecessary. Our survey revealed that of the 106 sites in the province, 53, so exactly half, didn't have any salmon farming equipment on them at all between March 2020 and April 2025. So they've been abandoned for a prolonged period of time. It indicates to us that there's lots of capacity to put more fish in the water, for the companies to achieve production targets without expanding geographically. We believe that expansion is unjustified. Using public waters by private companies is a great asset. It should be a reward for good performance and good behavior, which is the opposite of what we've seen in Newfoundland and Labrador. And the activity at the current time is simply too risky. Fisheries and Oceans Canada concluded a risk assessment of expansion of salmon farming in Newfoundland and Labrador, and they concluded that it would lead to interbreeding between farmed and wild salmon, population decline and loss, and other pollution in the marine environment. So our position is that companies should stay where they are, use what they have, and do what they can until the mess can be cleaned up and other problems with the industry solved. It also highlights what is a major policy inconsistency when it comes to salmon farming in Canada. In British Columbia, this issue has garnered a lot of attention. The previous federal government ordered all sea cages out of the water by 2029 because of the risk that they pose to wild Pacific salmon. On the East Coast, those risks are even greater. The damage is more severe. For example, farmed Atlantic salmon cannot escape and interbreed with Pacific salmon. They're separate species. On the East Coast, that happens. It's widely documented. And to provide a very simple example, it's like crossing poodles with wolves. They may come from the same ancient ancestor, but they're very, very different. They have different characteristics. One is domesticated, and science has shown over a very long time that hybrid offspring from escaped farmed salmon and wild salmon are unfit for survival in the wild. We're calling for policy consistency from the West Coast to the East Coast and a moratorium on expansion until this mess can be cleaned up and other well-known problems with the industry solved. And I can take any questions. All this material's up on our website. There's a gallery of images, there's a backgrounder, and a summary of the full report from the satellite survey.
Yeah, just one from us. The Newfoundland Aquaculture Industry Association says that the provincial regulator allows companies to store unused equipment, including sea cages, in leased marine areas before they're dismantled and recycled. So just wondering how ASF responds to that.
This equipment was not being temporarily stored for removal and proper disposal. Some of it has been there since 2011 and likely before that. 2011 is just the time that we were able to go back to with the satellite images. It is not permitted to allow this equipment to drift outside of the leases. For example, the locker, the first site we visited, is not a salmon farming lease. It's not permissible to discharge styrofoam into the environment. It's not permissible to lose equipment like this by sinking. Saying that equipment is being stored on these leases for later use or disposal would be similar to me driving down the highway, chucking my Tim Hortons coffee cup out, and then telling the officer that pulled me over I was just storing it in the ditch and planned to pick it up later. This is obviously disposal. This is obviously obsolete equipment, and this is a persistent long-term problem.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci. Ça conclut cette conférence de presse.
Thank you.